Thank you so much, Jill, and it's wonderful to be asked to participate in this great forum. Always wonderful to have a chance to have in-depth discussions with folks who are doing things at the cutting edge of medicine. They wanted us to start with what you're most excited about. And you know, one of the things I think about is sometimes you think that things are moving very slow. It's sort of like healing. You don't really see it as it's going, and then at the end you look at how far you've come. And I think about how in 1989 I was driving on the MacArthur Causeway in Miami, where I worked, and I remember hearing that Magic Johnson on the radio had AIDS. And a couple of my really good friends had also tested HIV positive. And I remember thinking, I am not going to grow old with my friend Carlos. Yet he is here today and healthy because of the transformation that has happened with regard to HIV medications. And I think we take that for granted. And yet, what was a death sentence back then, today, is effectively a chronic disease. And I think that's just one of the things that gives me hope about what we're doing with medicine. Murthy, tell us what you're most excited about right now.
Well, I mean, this is the golden age of medicine. Over the past 100 years, we've seen remarkable advancements in medicine with the development of chemical entities that can block harmful pathways or enhance beneficial pathways. But there's limits to that approach in that you have systemic effects, potential toxicity, side effects. There's a new revolution that we're at the early stages of, and that is to tap into the nervous system to treat disease. Now, the human body is amazing. There's all of these control mechanisms. There's sensors that can sense that things are off. There's wiring through the nerves to the brain, and then the brain can reflexively act on those signals to control things when they're off in healthy humans. With a lot of chronic conditions, these circuits are disrupted, they're dysfunctional, and that causes imbalance, whether it's autoimmune disease or other conditions. So what I'm excited about is being able to tap into these innate neural circuits and to recapitulate the natural control mechanisms to restore people to health. And we can talk more about it, but I think this is going to be a completely new way of treating people.
And Andrea, you trained as a physicist. Now you're working in biology and working in genomics.
Yeah, genomics, and also, you know, quite a lot of things happening in the clinics. You know, we've run our first 2 clinical trials that have been completely computationally predicted in terms of which drug should be given to the patients, and both of them completed with 100% success rate. So it's an exciting time. But obviously, what I'm most excited at the moment is this kind of new twist in my career that I've undertaken just about a year ago, in terms of becoming, keeping my lab at Columbia, but becoming the president of the John Zuckerberg BioHub in New York. And this is really dedicated to do something that is, I would say, quite ambitious. You know, basically the plan is to reprogram our own immune system. You know, our immune cells are the only cells that can go anywhere in our body, so they're the perfect. You know, you remember that movie, The Fantastic Voyage, where they shrink the people into the submarine? We have those submarines now. We don't need to shrink people, which the IRB was actually vehemently against. And we can send our own cells into our body and try to figure out what's wrong with individual organs, and not only what's wrong, but also potentially fix it. And so what it started is basically only possible because of the ability of 3 key institutions in the New York area, Yale, Rockefeller, and Columbia, coming together, and it would have never been able to happen within the context of a single institution. So this is really creating a new, developing a new community of immunologists that will use sophisticated approaches, including AI. It's a major investment in AI, and we'll talk about it later, I guess, to solve
Let's talk about it now, because we hear so much about artificial intelligence and the potential to be able to leverage what we're doing. But you know, we've been talking about large language models and artificial intelligence for 20 years, and some of the hype hasn't quite lived up to it. I mean, if you use Siri, Siri may have AI, but she's not that intelligent, really, at the end of the day. She doesn't have that iterative, generative ability to learn. Where are we right now in terms of artificial intelligence? Are we even, you know, in the batter's box, just in the first inning? Where are we and where do you think we can go? I know that's a very long-range question, but let's start with where we are right now, because we hear a lot of hype.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, we have to acknowledge that 2 Nobel Prizes were given, one in chemistry, one in medicine and physiology, were given essentially to AI. So I think we are definitely at an inflection point. Are we done? Absolutely not. And there's for instance, you know, anybody who's used ChatGPT knows that half of the things that come out are correct and half of the things that come out are invented. So there's a sort of black box component there that needs to be resolved. But it's still remarkable what can be done in that context. And I think for drug development in particular, this is having an incredible impact, because one of the biggest problems in drug development is to figure out what is the structure of the protein you're trying to target with a small molecule. And sort of the things like AlphaFold and other approaches that have been developed are really, you know, game changers in that context. So I think we are not anywhere close. And by the way, there are other areas of biology, for instance, the ones where we're working, which are about understanding how a cell works and what will the cell do in response to a particular stimulus, you know, a drug or a genetic mutation or whatever, where the large language models are not the optimal model to solve the problem. So we're working very hard on the mathematics that are underlying that. For instance, you know, in large language model, you use a dependency model which is very local. So the word on page 7, position 3 on line 5 may depend on the 3 words next to it or 10 words next to it, but it doesn't depend on the word on the page at the end of the book. In biology, that's not true. In biology, gene number 1 could be dependent on gene number 20,000. Right? So that needs to be a fundamental change in the way we develop AI, and CZI has made some really remarkable investment in that area with virtual cells, and so we're working. We will use many of these things to actually reprogram the immune system.
Munta, you also talked about the use in terms of research. You know, my fantasy would be that we would all have a genetic test that would show what we have. It would be in our record, and the record could pull out and say, hey, you know what? Bertha has one variant of the APOE4 gene. She's a woman of color. She's probably more apt to have Alzheimer's in late stage. Let's bring her in, and maybe it'll be able to either bring me into a trial, suggest that I get into a trial without my having to find that out, or also maybe suggest certain things that are appropriate for me to help prevent the development.
Yeah, look, first off, AI has been around in medicine for a long time. Since the 90s, there's hundreds of medical devices with AI that have been approved by the FDA. And you can talk about image analysis as an example,
right,
for detection of...
And a lot of them do not have a billing code.
Yep. But most of these are assistive. It's very difficult to validate these models for these systems to make primary decisions. So what's new, of course, is Gen AI, generative AI. And, you know, the question one really is of robustness. And you can swallow up the whole internet, but in the specific area of interest, how robust are the inputs? And these models are refreshed at some frequency, and, you know, medicine changes rapidly. So I think it'll get there over time. And success is all going to be based on the quality of the inputs into these models. And I think that's where the big focus is going to be. And I know there's a lot of working groups out there also thinking about how do you validate these models. That's really important in medicine. If you want these to be primary decision makers versus something that augments, say, a physician's thought process.
Most of the people I talk to these days say it's a co-pilot, it's a tool.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be the determining factor. So it should say to you, hey, have you considered this? And then as the doctor, or the clinician, whatever clinician, you have the critical thinking skills to look further. Do you think that's the case, or do you think at some point it'll actually say, you know what, you're wrong, this is right?
Well, I mean, I think it makes the physician think about the alternatives. It may flag something that the physician hasn't thought about. That's a good thing. That happens already today. But the ultimate decision-making is still with the physician. I don't think the systems are robust enough today, or will be there anytime soon to overrule physician judgment.
Well, in medicine, it's all about this false positive, false negative thing, right? So in some areas, for instance, analysis of radiographic images or mammograms, they've already shown, Regina Barzilai at MIT has developed methodologies that are outperforming any pathologies. And so the question is, at what point this will be used as coadjuvant in the diagnosis. And I think we are very close to the point where that is going to happen. In other areas, I agree, we're still very far away, and having suggestion more than decision is the right way to do it.
One of the things I worry about, and I think people have brought up, is in terms of how we do train these models. So in terms of the scientific aspect of it, I feel personally more confidence. But in terms of some of those interpretive things, I mean, we've seen the data that show, there are doctors who have this implicit bias thinking that people of color have a higher tolerance for pain. And how do we get that out of the system so it's not in there, so that, it doesn't perpetuate some of the things we know? Or as a woman, that their first thought is going to be, oh, it's in your head. Whereas this woman, there's a horrible case that was in the Washington Post where a woman had cancer, and they kept telling her, oh, you just have depression, that's why you're feeling so listless. How do we combat that as part of the decision process in terms of how we train?
Yeah, so one of the fundamental differences between an AI for medicine and the AI for more generalized purposes is that the latter can be trained on trillions of what they call tokens, right? So that you have an enormous amount of data on the internet. Now they're trying to train on movies, et cetera. So you have a universe that is extremely large of examples. In medicine, especially in a country where there is a balkanization of the medical systems, where each institution has its own data, it becomes harder, because are you going to train your AI just on the data that Northwell has, or Presbyterian has, or other places
and
have?
If you've seen one EHR, you've seen one EHR.
Exactly. And so I think that there is a scalability issue that is going to be something we have to solve. So countries like the UK, for instance, where they have a centralized system for health maintenance, may be more prone to bypass those biases that you've talked about, because the data is gathered on a scale that could actually really lean into making that happen. It's a challenging proposition, but and I think that more and more institutions are starting to learn how to work together. But data needs to be shared, because otherwise we will never be able to train the AI. There's this critical mass that needs to be reached before the appropriate decision can be made. In fact, when you go into, I think you were saying before, and you're absolutely right, when you go into a more specialized domain, for instance, I asked ChatGPT to give me references of some of the papers that I've written with another co-author. It gave me 5 references that were completely wrong, simply because the literature is not that massive, as compared to all the data that is on the internet. TikTok is 10 times bigger than all the literature on PubMed. So you've got to train on a body of work that is large enough before you start making good predictions.
So we're down to the last 5 minutes. I'd love for each of you to tell us, it's coming. We know that generative AI is coming and it's going to shift things over. Where do you think we're going to be in 3 or 5 years? Will we still be talking about it's coming, or will we see some real changes?
Well, it's difficult to predict with Gen AI, and I think there's many other massive advancements in medicine that will help patients before Gen AI. So if you look at Gen AI, it involves scooping up large amounts of publicly available information. A lot of patient data and information is not publicly available. So what are you scooping up? You're looking at publications. You're looking at whatever is readily accessible. So I'm not convinced that there's going to be huge progress or this is going to be the next big breakthrough in medicine. I think there's other really important ideas out there that will make an impact on patients nearer term.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I would say that, right now, rather than seeing AI as the next thing that will treat patients, I think AI is what's going to help us develop other technologies that are already well on their way to make that happen. So I think, obviously, cell-based therapy, Michel Sutherland just won the Breakthrough Award for CAR-T. CAR-T have a dramatic, applicability beyond cancer. And so this is exactly what we're trying to do at the BioHub. It's basically reprogram our own cells to help us preserve our health. There is design of an entire new class of drugs that are now, until now we were talking about druggable and undruggable targets. And right now with some of the technology using glues and protacs and other type of drugs that induce degradation of protein as opposed to so sticking to them and inhibiting them, we're now starting to be able to drug the undruggable genome. And that's really striking. So there are major advances in that context. And I think, as I said, as an ex-physicist, now I run clinical trials, obviously in collaboration with clinicians. And, the ability that we have, even with machine learning, and AI to predict which drug should be given to which specific patient has been revolutionized over the last 10 years. As I said, the first two have completed with 100% success rate, really been Nature Cancer and The Oncologist. So it's
So we're a lot
it's
closer to personalized medicine, you think?
Yeah, it depends also on the field. Like, for instance, in cancer, there's been so much data availability. Cancer has one advantage over the other classes of diseases, that models like cell lines are broadly available. Why? Because cancer cells like to grow. If you are a neurobiologist, until the iPSCs, the induced pluripotent stem cell, came about, you didn't have a model. You simply could not be reproducing what happened. So people use mice, and mice have a totally different response to drugs. In fact, every single drug for neurobiology being tested in mice has actually failed. Hopefully now they're starting to do a little bit better. So some fields have certain advantages over others, but yeah, I think in some fields we're starting to see major ability to deliver on those promises.
Yeah, I think one area that's having massive impact is this whole area of neuromodulation. It's stimulating nerves and interacting with the nervous system. There's already approved devices out there to treat patients with Parkinson's, where you have electrodes that interrupt aberrant signaling that restricts movement. You got some brilliant ideas out there on how to reprogram the default state network of the brain to help patients with Alzheimer's disease. So these are not drug-related approaches. Our own approach, so this is our device. It's tiny, the size of a multivitamin. This is implanted in the neck on the nerve to reprogram your immune system without the patient having to be on very potent immunosuppressive drugs. So you'll see a lot of these ideas that are not what you think of as traditional medicine, which is a pill or a biological drug. The body knows how to repair damaged tissue. Your bone, for example, is a living thing. It's constantly being broken down and resurfaced. Likewise, when you look at multiple sclerosis, the nerve sheath called the myelin layer is constantly being demyelinated and remyelinated. The problem with a lot of disease states is this balance has been disrupted. And the damaged part exceeds what the body is naturally able to repair. So why is that? So rather than use drugs, can we tap into these neural circuits to restore that homeostasis, to reprogram it? I think that's going to be a really exciting field. We've just completed our trials in rheumatoid arthritis. We'll start a trial in multiple sclerosis. And I think we're the tip of the spear. There'll be many such approaches in the future because discovery's only just begun in terms of how these systems are regulated in the body.
That is a wonderfully hopeful note on which to end. We can continue talking about this all day, but we will have other discussions as well. Murthy, Andrea, thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.